Yes, but not in its totality. Each and every release was separate. I would go straight into Mr. Trump's office and I would advise him of the task being accomplished
Why did you do that?
for two reasons. The first was so that he knew I was on it and I was doing what he had asked. The second was really to obtain credit so that he understood that, again, I was accomplishing what he wanted.
Do you have a memory of advising him about accomplishing that task of reducing the payments to vendors and his reaction? Do you have a memory of that?
Yes,
What do you remember him saying when you told him you accomplished that task?
it's fantastic. It's great.
How did that make you feel?
Like I was on top of the world.
Did you renegotiate other bills for Mr. Trump at the Trump Organization besides the ones you just mentioned?
Yes.
From your experience over the 10 years working at the Trump Organization, are you aware whether Mr. Trump directed other employees or executives to negotiate bills? Not to take the first bill, but to negotiate them down?
Yes.
Let me ask you a question, Mr. Cohen. During the years that you worked for Mr. Trump at the Trump Organization, did you threaten at times to sue people or companies during those years?
Yes.
And explain why you did that.
Well, it would depend on what the issue was. We had an issue, for example, with Miss USA pageant, with a Miss USA pageant contestant who Mr. Trump was being defamed. The Universe organization. So he brought an arbitration against her. That matter ultimately got resolved. If, with the press as an example, that if they had said something that angered him, I would reach out to the press and I would express to them their need to either redact or take the article down, or we would file an action against them.
Did you do that in a strong and threatening manner at times?
I would say so. Not all the time, but often.
Now, you mentioned a bit about this. During your time working for Mr. Trump at the Trump Organization, did you also work on some personal matters for him?
Yes.
Can you just give us a brief example of some of that?
So, one instance, his limousine was hit by a yellow cab. And knowing that I had deep roots into the yellow cab industry, he asked me to meet with the driver, who provided me with the police report, and to have them pay for the repair on the vehicle.
Did you ever do some personal work for regarding his residence of his family, for example?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
In his apartment, they had a floor that ended up causing damage into the main floor bathroom. They had al fresco on top, and I handled the adjustment with the insurance company.
And these are all matters that Mr. Trump asked you to handle for him.
Yes.
Did you also, as part of your work, and I think you mentioned this, interact frequently with the press for him?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Again, if it was in order to place a story that would be advantageous in some way, shape, or form, I would speak with them. If there was an article that caused him displeasure, I would speak with them about that as well.
So, did you work with the press to try to minimize negative stories and sort of enhance positive stories about Mr. Trump and his business?
Yes.
Was that a good part of your work for him, interacting with the press for him?
It was a portion of it, yes.
Now, you mentioned that you worked at Trump Tower at the offices of the Trump Organization. Is that right?
That's correct.
During the time that you worked there, where approximately was your office in relation to Mr. Trump's office?
Well, initially, when I started, it was towards the back of the office. That was Ivanka's old office until ultimately I moved to a different office that was maybe 50 feet, 60 feet from his office
During the time you worked there for Mr. Trump, approximately how often would you say you met with him or spoke with him?
every single day, multiple times per day.
And now we're talking about in the period before he ran for president in 2016, is that right?
Yes.
Now, at the time, again, we're talking about pre 2016, but in general, explain how you communicated with him.
Generally, it was either in person or on the cell phone or on the cell phone. Those were the two ways.
Understood. Do you have all of his cell phone and other telephone numbers in your contacts in your phone at the time?
I did.
And you used all those variety of numbers as a way to contact him?
Yes.
When he called you, did he generally call you on your cell phone or your work phone at the Trump organization?
Well, it was a combination of both. Most of the time, it would be on my cell phone, unless it was in the office. He would have one of his assistants ring me and ask me just to come over to Mr. Trump's office.
Did you ever contact Mr. Trump by contacting somebody else in order to get in contact with him?
Yes,
Who did you contact at various times to reach him?
many people. It depends. Also, who was with him at the time? It could be Rona, his executive assistant, ultimately Keith Schiller, who was his personal attache. It could be one of the Trump children. It could be Hope Hicks. It was any number of people.
And you had, for example, Keith Schiller's number in your contacts as well, right?
Yes,
And Hope Hicks' number in your contacts as well. And you use those numbers in your contacts to make those calls. Is that right?
yes, ma'am.
As far as you know, did Mr. Trump use email to do his work?
No, Mr. Trump never had an email address.
Did he ever comment to you about folks who, time to time, get in trouble using email?
Yes,
Can you tell us about that?
yes. During certain conversations, he would comment that emails are like written papers. It's he knows too many people who have gone down as a direct result of having emails that prosecutors can use in a case.
When you say going down, you mean getting in some sort of trouble?
Yes, ma'am.
When you met him in person, you said, where did you generally meet him?
In his office,
What times of day generally in his office?
all throughout the day.
Were they sometimes early in the morning?
Yes,
Sometimes later towards the end of the day or even early evening?
yes,
When you met him at the office, did you generally meet in his office?
yes.
Did you need to make an appointment to go see him in his office?
No, ma'am.
Can you explain, what kind of a policy was there at the Trump organization about executives coming in to meet with Mr. Trump?
Mr. Trump had an open door policy, which if there was somebody in there, you waited. If not, you knocked on the door and I would say, "Boss, do you have a second?" And I would walk right in.
And others did the same to your knowledge?
To my knowledge, yes.
Now, when you met with Mr. Trump at the Trump organization in his office, I'm sorry, did you generally record those meetings in your calendar?
No, ma'am.
As part of your work at the Trump organization, did you feel that it was part of your job to keep him updated on matters that you were handling for him?
Yes, it was actually required.
Tell us what you mean by that.
When he would task you with something, he would then say, "Keep me informed. Let me know what's going on." And what he was saying, what everyone did is, as soon as you had a result, an answer, you would go straight back and tell him, especially if it was a matter that was troubling to him.
So, two things just to break that down. You said everybody. Do you mean you're aware of other executives who.
I apologize. Yes, other executives.
So they would report back to him as well?
Yes.
But you felt it was part of your job and what he wanted from you to promptly report to him when you were handling a matter for him about the progress and whether it was resolved?
Yes. And that's what I did.
Did you have a sense or did you learn from your experiences with him that if you didn't keep him updated or things didn't go well that you were working on, that would create an issue for Mr. Trump?
Yes.
Can you explain that just a little bit?
If you didn't immediately provide him with the information and he learned of it in another manner, that wouldn't go over well for you.
To the extent that you discussed the requirement to report frequently to Mr. Trump, was it your sense, based on working with him, that he was a micromanager about the work of his organization and of which he was concerned?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you have a way of referring to Mr. Trump when you worked for him?
Yes.
What was that?
I would call him boss or Mr. Trump.
And in working for him for 10 years, all the variety of the types of work that you did for him, what was it like for you? How did you feel about working at the Trump organization during those years?
It was fantastic. It was working for him, especially during those 10 years, was an amazing experience in many, many ways. There were great times. There were several less than great times. But for the most part, I enjoyed the responsibilities that were given to me. I enjoyed working with my colleagues at the Trump organization, the Trump children. It was a big family.
During the years that you worked for him at the Trump organization, did you at times lie for him?
I did
Why did you do that?
because it's what was needed in order to accomplish a task.
Was there also a sense, did you feel a sense of obligation towards him as well?
Yes.
Did you at times during your work for the Trump organization, at the Trump organization for Mr. Trump, bully people for him?
Yes, ma'am.
Why did you do that?
Again, and in order to accomplish the task. The only thing that was on my mind was to accomplish the task to make him happy.
Now, over the years that you worked for him, did he reward you with some additional titles?
Yes.
What Tell us just a little bit about that.
Well, he placed me on the board of the Miss Universe organization. There were three members, Mr. Trump, Alan Weisselberg, and myself. Years later, myself and another colleague were made co-presidents of Trump Productions. I sat on the board of five different Trump properties as treasurer.
Those were some of the additional titles that he rewarded you with.
Yes, ma'am.
Are you aware that in connection with your work for him, some people described you as his fixer?
Yes. Some have described me as that.
From your perspective, is that in some ways an accurate title, an accurate moniker?
It's fair.
I just want to ask you some questions about your telephone numbers, and I'm going to ask you only about the last four digits of some of those numbers. During the period of 2015 to 2017, when you were working at the Trump organization, did you use a cell phone number ending in 6866?
I did.
Did you also use a cell phone number ending in 0114?
I did.
And did you continue to use those two numbers for a period of time after you left the Trump organization?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you still continue to this day to use the cell phone number ending in 0114?
Yes.
Now, during the time that you worked at the Trump organization for Mr. Trump, you also had a landline work number, is that right?
That's correct.
Was that 212-836-3212?
Yes, ma'am.
Obviously, you no longer use that number.
No, ma'am.
After you left the Trump organization, did you also have a number associated with a law firm in New York?
Yes.
Was that 212-872-9849?
Yes.
Obviously, you don't still use that number.
No, ma'am.
In connection with the investigation of this case, did our office ask you to provide two cell phones that you had used for a period of time up until April of 2018?
Yes.
And did you agree to provide those two cell phones to us that you had previously used with the two numbers, cell phone numbers that I just mentioned, ending in 0114 and 6866?
Yes, I did.
Did you provide those phones to us in January of 2023?
Sounds correct. Yes.
And was that pursuant to our request that you turned those over to us?
Yes. Merely the request.
Did you consent to do that voluntarily?
I did.
Now, you keep contacts on your phones. There were contacts that were kept on those phones, is that right?
That's correct.
What kind of information, just generally, was in your contacts on those phones?
Names, email addresses, potential addresses, cell phone numbers, home numbers, fax numbers.
Were there also sometimes other information associated with folks whose contacts you had in there?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you keep anybody else's contacts in your phone as well?
Personal ones, yes.
In other words, however, what I'm talking about is not just your contacts, of your contacts and the folks that you know, but did you also at some point include or sync with your contacts somebody else's contacts?
I did.
Tell the jury about that.
Actually, I didn't do it. It was done by the IT people. I was spending a significant amount of time with Mr. Trump, and we ultimately decided, he agreed, to have his contact number synced to my cell number to my account as well. That way, if we needed to travel, if he needed to get somebody on the phone, he would just say, Michael, get me so and so, and on the line, and I would have gotten them on the cell phone.
As a result of this syncing process, did your personal contacts also end up in his phone?
I'm not certain about that.
You're not certain. Just his contacts in your phone.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you remember approximately when you synced or someone else synced his contacts into your phone, if you know?
I don't. I don't.
As a result of having both your contacts and Mr. Trump's contacts in your phone, did you have over 30,000 contacts in your phone?
Yes, ma'am.
During the time you worked at the Trump Organization for Mr. Trump, was your email address mcohen@trumporg.com?
Yes, it was.
After you left the Trump Organization during the years of 2017 and 2018, did you also use another email address, mcohen@mdpc.com?
Yes,
You no longer have that email address, is that right?
that's correct.
Did you also use a personal Gmail address that you still currently use?
Yes,
Mr. Cohen, do you know someone named David Pecker?
I do.
Who is he and how do you know him?
I knew David Pecker before I even knew Mr. Trump. We had mutual friends, and we had met at a function at out at in Long Island many years ago, and then was reacquainted with David Pecker, who is the president CEO of AMI. Most people know him more from his magazines and his newspapers, National Enquirer, Star, OK, and Men's Health, etc.
When you did you from time to time speak to Mr. Pecker even before you started at the Trump Organization?
Not regularly, no.
Once you were at the Trump Organization and introduced to him again by Mr. Trump, did you speak to him from time to time?
Yes,
When you spoke to him, did you speak to him by phone?
yes,
Did you have his cell phone and work numbers in your phone contacts?
yes,
Did you use those contacts to speak with him?
yes, ma'am.
At times, did you also speak with Mr. Pecker using an encrypted application called Signal?
Yes.
Why did you do that?
Well, depending upon the matter, sometimes we thought that encryption, not having the event traceable, would be beneficial.
Was it because it was something you wanted to keep confidential and didn't want anybody to be able to trace it or look into those communications?
Yes, ma'am.
And did you also at times communicate with Mr. Pecker by email?
Yes,
And you had his email address as well in your contacts, is that right?
yes, ma'am.
Now, did you speak with Mr. Pecker at the Trump Organization about matters having to do with Mr. Trump prior to June of 2015?
Yes, but rarely.
And was it what sort of matters were the few matters that you spoke to him about, if you could remember, prior to 2015?
There were some things that had come up. For example, Mr. Trump had donated money to a charity. It was Harlem for Hoops. We had come into information that they had no funding, and I brought it to Mr. Trump's attention. He said yes. We wanted to get that story out. So it would be things like that. And
To try to get a good story out about him.
a good story, yes.
And to your knowledge, prior to 2015, when Mr. Trump announced that he was running for the presidency, did you know whether Mr. Pecker or AMI ever paid for public stories to prevent them from becoming public?
There were stories.
I apologize. My question is quite wrong. Prior to Mr. Trump announcing his run for the presidency, are you aware of AMI ever paying to suppress stories?
No, ma'am.
Would you say you had a good relationship with Mr. Pecker?
I would. Yes,
Did you know someone named Dylan Howard?
I do.
Who was Dylan Howard?
Dylan Howard was an employee over at AMI.
What was your understanding about what his role was at AMI, if you knew?
He worked for Mr. Pecker to the same extent that I worked for Mr. Trump.
Did you speak with Mr. Howard in person or generally by phone?
I spoke to everybody in three different manners: by phone, by email, and in person.
Did you have Mr. Dillon's phone numbers and contacts in your phone?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you use those numbers to contact him?
I did.
Now, at times, did you also communicate with Mr. Howard using that encrypted application Signal?
Yes, ma'am.
And why did you choose to do that with your communications with Mr. Howard?
For the same reason, it was a sensitive matter that we wanted to keep private.
Did you also communicate by text with Mr. Howard
Yes.
and sometimes by email?
Yes.
Again, using your contacts that you had in your phone.
Yes, ma'am.
Did there come a time in 2011 that Mr. Trump was exploring a run for the presidency?
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So in 2011, I had come across, while reading the paper, a poll that stated 6% of all the people who had taken the poll thought Mr. Trump should be president of the United States of America. And so I took that article and brought it to Mr. Trump. And I said, "What do you think?" He said, "It's interesting. We should look into it."
And did he look into it in some degree in 2011?
He did.
Do you recall whether he spoke publicly in 2011 about exploring a run for the presidency?
He did. That was post I had created for him, my own website called shouldtrumprun.com. And many people came to that website. It was further proof that his name recognition, his popularity, especially because of the hit show The Apprentice, was so strong.
And just to go back to the question, do you remember giving some public speech, him giving public speeches about his considering a run for the presidency in 2011?
Yes.
Were those, if you recall, covered in the news?
Yes.
Did he ultimately decide to run for the presidency in 2011?
No.
What was your understanding why he decided not to run?
There were several large real estate projects he acquired, as well as another season of The Apprentice. And as Mr. Trump told me, you don't leave Hollywood, Hollywood leaves you.
So he decided to stay and do that work instead.
Yes, ma'am.
Did there come a time then in June of 2015 when Mr. Trump announced that he was running for president?
Yes,
And how did he make that announcement, if you recall?
I do. It was at the atrium at Tower. He came down the stairs to the lowest level, and he had set up a podium. He made the announcement and a speech.
Now, at the time in June of 2015, were you, or any time, an official paid member of Mr. Trump's campaign?
No.
Nevertheless, did you assist Mr. Trump in his campaign?
So, just some colorfulness. In 2011, when Mr. Trump decided not to run, he actually promised me that he was going to do it in the next election cycle. And for years thereafter, we would talk about him running in 2015. At the very beginning, when he ultimately said, "I'm doing it," there was a lot of back and forth about which date the announcement should be. A very small group of people were attached to the campaign when it was first launched.
Did you have some discussions directly with Mr. Trump about what your role might be in terms of assisting with his campaign?
I wasn't going to be part of it. I was just going to be a surrogate.
Explain what you mean by surrogate.
Sure. Surrogate was someone who speaks on behalf of the candidate and defends him in the press, speaks to the press, provides color, but not as a member of the campaign, but rather as an outside person. So again, as to give the appearance that it's unbiased.
And that's the role that you performed for him and for the campaign.
Yes,
And did you make public appearances for him and for his campaign?
I did.
Tell us a little bit about that. What kind of public appearances?
I would make public appearances on television, CNN, MSNBC, ABC, whoever, CBS. I would frequently provide comment to press regarding different matters that kept popping up.
Did you leverage your press contacts in that way from Mr. Trump's campaign?
Yes.
Your relationships?
Yes.
Did you also develop some relationships with some key people on behalf of the campaign who put together some kind of committees or groups for him?
Yes.
Tell the jury a little bit about that.
So while watching the rallies, I had gone to Mr. Trump and I said, one of the things that I notice is that it's very white and we really need diversity. If you're going to win, you're going to need diversity. And so I started a group called National Diversity Coalition for Trump, along with Pastor Carol Scott, an evangelical pastor from Cleveland, Ohio.
And you did that for his campaign, is that right?
I did.
Did you have other important contacts in the Christian evangelical community that you sort of worked with for Mr. Trump?
Yes.
Did you have a campaign email address, by the way?
Yes, I was given a campaign email address.
Around the time that the campaign began, did Mr. Trump express to you any concern about negative stories about his personal life that might affect his candidacy?
Yes.
What did he say in substance?
You know, that when this comes out, meaning the announcement, just be prepared. There's going to be a lot of women coming around.
Now, turning back to his announcement of running for the presidency in June of 2015, did you invite David Pecker to attend that announcement?
I did.
Did you invite other people as well?
I did.
Now, sometime after the announcement in June, in about August of 2015, did you and Mr. Trump meet with David Pecker at Trump Tower to discuss what AMI could do for the campaign?
Yes, ma'am.
Where exactly did the three of you meet?
Mr. Trump's office on the 26th floor.
Could you tell the jury, please, what was discussed and what was agreed to at that meeting?
What was discussed was the power of the National Enquirer in terms of being located at the cash register of so many super that if we can place positive stories about Mr. Trump, that would be beneficial. That if we could place negative stories about some of the other candidates, that would also be beneficial.
Was there anything else that Mr. Pecker said he could also do for Mr. Trump's candidacy?
Yeah.
What in substance did he say?
What he said was that he could keep an eye out for anything negative about Mr. Trump and that he would be able to help us to know in advance what was coming out and try to stop it from coming out.
And who did he say he would get in touch with if he was able to identify those types of stories?
The answer was me. Mr. Trump also, knowing my relationship with David, the two of you should work together and anything negative that comes out, you let Michael know and we'll handle it.
Now, during subsequent to that meeting, during the campaign, did AMI run stories that were positive for Mr. Trump?
Yes, ma'am.
And did they run stories that were negative on Mr. Trump's opponents?
Yes, ma'am.
And in the course of that, did AMI preview for Mr. Trump and for you some of those stories that they were going to run in their magazines and periodicals?
Yes, ma'am.
Could you describe just a few that you recall that they ran specifically to benefit Mr. Trump? Some stories that were either negative on his opponents or positive for him?
So some of the negative ones that I would receive from David or from Dylan Howard was Hillary Clinton wearing very thick glasses and some allegations that she had some brain injury. There was Ted Cruz, a photo of his father with Lee Harvey Oswald, claiming that Ted Cruz's father was involved in the assassination of JFK. There was an article on Marco Rubio in a swimming pool with a bunch of other men, claiming that they were having a drug binge of some sort.
Did AMI sometimes send over the covers of some of these stories to you before they ran them?
Yes.
And what did you do with that material when they sent it over to you?
Immediately showed it to Mr. Trump
And for what purpose did you show it to Mr. Trump?
so that he knew that David was loyal, was on board, was doing everything that he said he was going to do in that August meeting and was actually doing it.
And do you recall from time to time when you showed Mr. Trump some of these stories what in general, his reactions were?
That's fantastic. That's unbelievable.
Now, did AMI ever actually seek your input into the types of stories or the content of some of the stories that they were going to run?
Yes.
Can we show, please, People's Exhibit 166, which is in evidence? Are you able to read that, Mr. Cohen?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you recognize generally this email?
I do.
Can you just tell the jury a little bit about what this email was?
This is an email from me, Trump org, on January 6, 2016, to Barry Levine and CC to Dylan Howard. Barry Levine was an employee as well at AMI.
Did Barry Levine send you something in this email?
Yes.
What did he send you?
He sent to me an email that says, Michael, greetings and Happy New Year. As our readers can't get enough of Mr. Trump, we are repackaging and repurposing past material from our files and adding additional material. Of course, also of a positive nature. Then goes on, there's a series of bullet points. Donald was quietly given away.
He's describing the content of some of these articles.
Yes.
Can we blow up the top email to Barry Levine? And you copied Dylan Howard on it. Read your response.
I stated, yes, take out the part of the penthouse pet Sandra as it offers nothing. Also, I would like to reword the part about Atlantic City. Let's speak tomorrow.
This is as a reminder, you are listening to a reading of the transcript of the case of the people of the state of New York against Donald J. Trump, indictment 71543/2023. To ensure future content, court transcript readings of this and other cases, we kindly ask that you visit everylegalword.com and support this cause. We now resume this reading where we left off.
Why did you ask AMI to remove the penthouse pet reference?
I thought it would be negative to Mr. Trump as, again, it dealt with women in penthouse.
And did AMI agree to make the edits that you suggested?
Yes, ma'am.
What is the title of this story? Can you just scroll down just a little bit? Thank you so much. The title of that story, can you see what the title of that story was going to be? Was it The Trump That Nobody Knows?
Yes. It was going to go under the headline, The Donald Trump Nobody Knows.
And I'm sorry, would you say again what the date of this email was?
January 6th, 2016.
Okay. And can we now take that down and put up People's 152 in evidence? And can we direct your attention to the article entitled The Trump Nobody Knows? And maybe you can just center on that. Did this article actually come out
Yes, ma'am.
that you spoke to AMI about?
I'm sorry?
That's all right. You said that the email that you sent was either January 6th of 2016. And what's the date of this article here?
It was posted on January 13th of 2016.
So about a week later, AMI ran the article with your suggestions.
Yes, ma'am.
And is this an example of your working with AMI to get articles out that benefited Mr. Trump's campaign?
It is an example.
And this was consistent with what was discussed at the Trump Tower meeting with Mr. Pecker and Mr. Trump?
Yes.
Thank you. We can take that down. Now, in the fall of 2015, did you come to learn of a negative story being circulated by a former doorman at Trump Tower?
Yes, ma'am.
And how did you learn of that story?
I was told of the story by either David Pecker or Dylan Howard.
And very briefly, what was the nature of the story that they indicated to you was out there circulating?
That there was a love child.
Actually, I think I take my question back about the circulating, that they heard about the doorman who had this story, right?
Yes, ma'am.
After you learned of the story, did you speak to Mr. Trump about it?
I did.
Why did you do that?
Well, I went to him immediately to advise him that there was a story because it was a negative story for him and to get his direction on what he wanted me to do.
Did you indicate to him at the time the name of the employees who were referenced in this potential story?
Yes, I provided him with all the information.
And did it involve actually two employees at the Trump organization
Yes, ma'am.
who were married to each other?
Yes.
Did Mr. Trump, can you describe your conversation that you had with Mr. Trump when you advised him of this? What did he tell you to do?
He told me to make sure that this story doesn't get out. You handle it.
Did he ask you also to do anything with respect to the affected employees?
Yes.
What did he say in substance?
He asked me to speak to them and let them know it's being taken care of.
Now, what did you do in terms of, at that point, in terms of making sure that the story didn't get out?
I work with David Pecker and Dylan Howard
And you worked with them to do what?
in order to obtain the story, all of the life rights to the story.
Who did you understand was going to either purchase or try to take care of, well, take care of purchasing the life rights to the story or otherwise making sure that the story didn't get out?
David Pecker.
And along the way, did either Dylan Howard or David Pecker update you about what they were doing with respect to that story?
Yes, ma'am.
And as the matter progressed and you got updates from Dylan Howard or David Pecker, did you update Mr. Trump about the matter?
Immediately.
Now, at some point, did you learn that AMI had entered into an agreement with the doorman regarding the story?
Yes.
What did you learn, just briefly, about what the general terms were of the agreement with that AMI entered into with this particular doorman?
That they were going to pay him $30,000. They were executing an agreement with the doorman in order to obtain the life rights to this story.
And when you say to obtain the life rights, was it to publish the story or not to publish the story?
It was to not publish the story.
But to control the life rights so that nobody else could publish it.
Correct. Take it off the market.
Now, did you update, actually, when Dylan Howard and Mr. Pecker told you they were going to do that, they were going to acquire the life rights for $30,000, did you tell them that Mr. Trump would be grateful?
Absolutely.
And when you spoke to Mr. Trump about it, was he grateful?
Absolutely.
Now, did AMI at some point send you their agreement with the doorman for those life rights for $30,000?
Yes,
And did you review it?
I did.
Why did you review it?
Well, I reviewed it to ensure that Mr. Trump was fully protected. I also asked them to send it to me so that I could show Mr. Trump that it's being taken care of.
And did you, when you reviewed that agreement, did you provide AMI with any feedback about the terms in the agreement?
I did.
What did you tell them?
Um, I thought that there needed to be a clause in there, a significant penalty for $1 million per violation of any of the terms of the agreement to ensure that the doorman knew not to go ahead and talk about this matter.
So you suggested that there be a heavy hammer to make sure that he didn't break the terms of the agreement.
Yes, ma'am.
Did you also suggest some other term involving perpetuity for this agreement?
Yes.
Can you explain that?
What I found was that the agreement had what I considered to be an end date to it. And so rather, I said, why not just let's make this in perpetuity?
What does that mean in perpetuity?
It means that it's forever, that he owns the document. They own the story forever, and it can never come out.
And did AMI agree to include that term as well in the agreement?
He did.
Can we put up, please, People's 165 in evidence? And do you recognize that email, first of all?
I do.
Who is it from and who is it to?
It's from Dylan Howard on December 19th of 2015 to me at the Trump org with the subject headline of update. It reads, Michael, it was remiss of me not to contact you yesterday. We were on deadline for the magazine. Nevertheless, I wanted to confirm that the source executed an addendum to the agreement with a liquidated damages clause. He has been compensated accordingly. Cheers, Dylan.
Can we also put up now People's 155 in evidence? Is it possible to blow that up just a little bit? Do you recognize that, Mr. Cohen?
I do, ma'am.
What is that?
This is the amendment that I was just describing.
And is that the amendment that contains the $1 million liquidation clause and the clause about it continuing in perpetuity?
Yes, that would be sections 2 and 3 of the amendment.
Now, once that was accomplished by AMI and they included the terms that you wanted to protect Mr. Trump, did you advise Mr. Trump that you had gotten that done?
Yes, ma'am.
Why did you tell him that?
Again, in order to ensure that he knows that David's doing exactly what he said he would. Also for credit.
In terms of credit, did you tell him that you got the $1 million put in and the in perpetuity clause put in?
Yes.
Why did you do that?
In order to get credit for accomplishing the task.
And what was Mr. Trump's reaction when you told him that?
It's great. That's great.
Now, is it your understanding that AMI bought the life rights to the doorman story as part of what Mr. Pecker had agreed to at the Trump Tower meeting with you and Mr. Trump in August 2015?
Yes.
You could take that down. Thank you so much. Let me direct your attention now to June of 2016. And around that time, did you learn that a woman by the name of Karen McDougal was looking to sell a story regarding her relationship with Mr. Trump?
Yes, ma'am.
And how did you learn that?
Again, I received a phone call from David Pecker or Dylan Howard.
And what generally did they tell you, just briefly in substance, about what this story was about?
That she's a Playboy playmate, that there is a story that is looking to be sold on the street to news outlets about a relationship that she had with Mr. Trump.
And when you learned of the story, what, if anything, did you think about its potential impact on Mr. Trump's presidential campaign?
Significant.
Did you tell Mr. Trump what you had learned from AMI about Karen McDougal?
Immediately after I got off the phone with AMI.
And can you tell us about the conversation you had with Mr. Trump after learning about that story?
So I went to the office, knocked on it. I said, "Boss, I got to talk to you." He said, "Come in." I went in. I told him about what I had just learned. I asked him if he knew who Karen McDougal was, if he knows anything about the story. His response to me was, "She's really beautiful." I said, "Okay, but there is a story that's right now being shopped."
And did you draw on any, based on your experience with Mr. Trump, did you draw any conclusion based on his response to you?
Objection.
Sustained.
Did Mr. Trump ask you to take any action with respect to the story?
Yes.
What did he ask you in general to do?
Make sure it doesn't get released.
What did you do as a result? What did you take that to mean you should do?
we need to we need to acquire the story. And so I went ahead and reached back out to both Dylan Howard and as well as to David Pecker.
Now, during the time period of about June of maybe June 16th or so of 2016 to August 5th of 2016, did you communicate frequently, regularly with Mr. Pecker and Mr. Howard regarding Karen McDougal?
Yes, ma'am.
Why did you do that?
Again, the purpose is to stop the story from being sold or marketed to an outside source.
Did you want to make sure that AMI was doing that?
Absolutely.
Objection.
Sustained.
How did you communicate? Well, let me ask you a question. Did AMI regularly update you about what was happening with their negotiations in terms of the story?
Yes.
And was that consistent with what they had, David Pecker had agreed to do at Trump Tower to notify you if matters like this were happening?
Yes.
How did you communicate with David Pecker and Dylan Howard during this time?
Again, it would either be by phone, text, email, app.
Okay, when you say app, sometimes using the Signal app,
Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. The Signal app.
that's okay. Let me just finish the question and then you answer because the court reporter also needs to get it down.
I'm sorry.
And did you use for this transaction that you were working with AMI, did you use the Signal app?
I believe so.
And why was that?
Again, because of the nature of the issue, to make sure that it remained private.
At various times when you were receiving updates from either Dylan Howard or David Pecker about the progress with Karen McDougal, did you update Mr. Trump frequently?
Yes.
Can we put up now, please, People's Exhibit 177A, which is also in evidence? Now, I'm just going to ask you, do you recognize these texts between yourself and Dylan Howard during this time period from about June 16th of 2016 to November 1st of 2016?
I think it says here June 20th of 2016.
My apologies. Do you recognize these texts during the time period that's referenced in this exhibit?
I do.
Let's take a look at first, please, the text with Dylan Howard on June 16th of 2016. Can you read out for the jury all of the text from June 16th of 2016? And along the way, you can tell the jury what they refer to and what they mean.
So this is a June 16th of 2016 communication between Dylan Howard and myself, and it states, meeting will be on Monday per their terms, Dylan.
And what's your response?
My response back was, understood. Thank you for everything.
And what did you understand this was about in terms of the meeting on their terms?
This is about meeting with Karen McDougal and her people.
Now, let me direct your attention. What is the date of this?
The date is June 16th of 2016.
And can we take that down for a moment and show People's Exhibit 262 in evidence? Do you recognize these texts with Keith Schiller between yourself and Keith Schiller?
I do.
Now, you recall that you told the jury that sometimes you spoke to or contacted Keith Schiller in order to get in touch with Mr. Trump.
Yes.
Can we look at page 2, please? Lines 16 to 20, dated June 16th of 2016. Can you see if we can call those out? Mr. Cohen, can you read those texts between yourself and Keith Schiller on that same day, June 16th of 2016?
Yes, ma'am. So this was from me to Keith Schiller asking, can we speak? I need you.
And what does he respond?
He then responds, I didn't receive.
His response?
I didn't receive a response back. And so I followed it up with another that says, "You there?" He then responds to me on Dallas. I think he meant in Dallas. I then responded to him, "Where's the boss?" Which of course referenced Mr. Trump. He then responds to me next to me. And then I then ask, "Is he free to speak?"
Why are you trying to reach Mr. Trump on this date of June 16th, 2016?
Regarding the Karen McDougal matter.
Was it an update that, in response to an update that you had just received from Dylan Howard about a meeting with Karen McDougal's people?
Yes, that I thought was important.
Is this an example of you contacting Mr. Trump to give him updates about what was progressing with Karen McDougal?
Yes, ma'am.
You can take that down. Can we now put up People's 349 in evidence? And take a look at the call on 6/16 of 2016. Do you recognize these? These are calls between yourself and Mr. Trump, summary calls. Do you see a call between the two of you at 6:51 p.m.
Yes, ma'am.
for 2 minutes and 31 seconds? Did you have that call with Mr. Trump right after you asked Keith Schiller if he was available, meaning Mr. Trump, to speak?
Yes.
And what do you believe that you discussed with Mr. Trump on that call?
The updates that I received on the Karen McDougal matter.
Thank you. You can take that down. Can we go back now, please, to People's Exhibit 177A in evidence? And can we call out the text on June 20th of 2016 and blow those up from Mr. Cohen? Thank you. Can you start with a text from Dylan Howard that says, "I'm about to meet her. Her name is Karen McDougal."
Yes, ma'am.
Former Playboy playmate.
So I received a series of messages. This one is dated Monday, June 20th of 2016, whereby Dylan Howard sends to me, "I'm about to meet with her. Her name is Karen McDougal, former Playboy playmate." I then respond to Mr. Howard, "Okay, we need to speak." He then responds to me, "Yes." He then responds to me again, "When we break." And I respond back, "Okay." He then sends to me a response. Spoke, it says Spike, but it means spoke to DP, referencing David Pecker. "We just broke. I'm wrapping up with them, and then we will convene a three-way call between us all to sort this out. Understand, I've got this locked down for you. I won't let it get out of my grasp. I won't let it out of my grasp."
Now, did you insist at this time on having a call with Dylan Howard right after he met with Karen McDougal?
Yes, ma'am.
And why did you do that?
Because I needed to get an update so I could provide it to Mr. Trump.
And shortly after these updates from Mr. Howard, did you actually have a call with both Dylan Howard and David Pecker to find out about their interview with Karen McDougal?
Yes, ma'am.
And what was the substance of what they told you during that three-person call about progress with Karen McDougal?
That they believe that they have this under control, as Dylan had stated to me. "I will get this locked down for you. I won't let it out of my grasp."
Did Dylan Howard tell you what his opinion was about whether he believed that Karen McDougal had had a relationship with Mr. Trump?
Objection.
Sustained.
Was it important for you to have that call with Dylan Howard and David Pecker?
Yes.
And that's to make sure that things were being taken care of for Mr. Trump?
Yes.
Did you have another call later that night with Dylan Howard to have some further conversations about the progress of the deal?
Yes.
Now, you said you did update Mr. Trump on the progress at that point with Karen McDougal.
Yes, ma'am.
And do you know whether at that time that update was either in person or by telephone?
I don't recall.
I'm going to direct your attention now to a little later in June of 2016, maybe a week or so around the same time. Were you present for a conversation that Mr. Trump had directly with David Pecker about the Karen McDougal matter?
Yes, ma'am.
Where were you when you were present for and overheard that conversation?
In Mr. Trump's office.
And who else was in the office besides yourself and Mr. Trump? It was just the two of you?
I believe so, yes.
And did he have a call at that point with Mr. Pecker?
Yes.
How did he make that call?
He had the call put through, and he had a speaker box on his desk. And instead of lifting up the phone, he used the speaker box, so I was able to hear.
And can you tell the jury about what you recall from that conversation with Mr. Trump had with Mr. Pecker?
He asked him how things were going with the matter, and David said, "We have this under control, and we will take care of this."
Was there a discussion on that call about how much it might cost to buy the story and who might pay for it?
Yes, ma'am.
Just in substance, what was that conversation?
So David had stated that it's going to cost them $150,000 to control the story, to which Mr. Trump replied, "No problem, I will take care of it."
Was there an understanding about who would initially purchase that story?
Yes.
And who was discussed on that call that would purchase that story?
AMI was going to lay out the funds, and as Mr. Trump had stated to David, "I will take care of it."
And what did you understand that to mean?
He was going to buy it back.
But it wasn't, was
I'm
it
sorry, pay it back.
described?
Pay it back.
Was it described at that point how that might occur?
No, ma'am.
After that call, did you then have a call or call Mr. Pecker?
Yes.
And tell us a little bit about that conversation that you had with Mr. Pecker.
I just wanted to make sure that I was being updated regarding the entire matter.
Did you let him know on that call that you had overheard that conversation that he had with Mr. Trump?
Yes.
Now, let's put back up, if we could, please. 177A, Mr. Cohen's text with Dylan Howard. And now the text on July 28th of 2016 through July 29th of 2016. And let's see if we can call those out for Mr. Cohen to read.
So it's Thursday, July 28th of 2016. It's from me to Dylan Howard. "Can you call me?" Dylan Howard responds back, "I've not heard back from our guy yet, so no update. Let me call him this AM and get the latest. Does that work?"
Who did you understand his guy to be?
I believe it was Keith Davidson.
And who was Keith Davidson in relation to this matter?
Keith Davidson is an attorney that was representing Miss McDougal in this transaction.
And did you understand from Dylan Howard that Mr. Davidson was doing the negotiating with AMI for Ms. Dougal?
Yes.
Objection, Judge.
Can you continue reading?
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry. Objection.
Overruled.
Okay.
Same date, Thursday, the 28th of July, 2016. I sent a text to Dylan Howard. Yes, and thank you.
Again, if you could just read them just as they apply to July 29th.
Sure. He then expresses to me they rejected the offer, told them to come back to me. It says my, but it's me by EOD, which means end of day, with a realistic number. He agreed to that. He fears she was she he fears she has been convinced to tell her story to ABC and really wants to. I implored my guy to get it done, all caps. He's getting back to me.
Is that the last text?
No.
I'm sorry, I apologize.
I then respond back to him, okay. To which he responds to me, "We are having a video conference with her next week to outline the opportunities we will present to her. We will present her to sign up with us." I then ask, "Do you know what day?" And he responds to me, "Monday or Tuesday." And I respond again, "Okay, thank you."
Now, why were you pressing for this information from Dylan Howard?
So several things here. One, I wanted to know that the number what I wanted to know what the number was because I would have to report that to Mr. Trump. When they stated that they were having a video conference with her the next week to outline the opportunities, I needed to know what day again so that I could update Mr. Trump and he could have all necessary information.
Did you also speak to David Pecker around this time about how things were moving along in the negotiation with Karen McDougal and her lawyers?
Yes.
Was there some particular pressure that you felt at this point that AMI should get this done?
Yes.
What was that?
There was the campaign, and we were concerned that this story was going to find its way to ABC, meaning ABC News.
Now, we can take that down. Thank you. Let me direct your attention now to August 5th. Well, withdrawn. At some point in August now of 2016, so shortly after those texts, did you learn that indeed an agreement had been finalized between AMI and Karen McDougal?
Yes.
And how did you learn that?
I was told by David Pecker and Dylan Howard.
And what was your understanding from them about what the terms of that agreement were going to be?
The terms were going to be compensation to her in the amount of $150,000, as well as they were going to provide her with 24 penned articles that would bear her name, as well as she was going to be on two covers of one of the various magazines that they owned.
And did you have a conversation just between yourself and David Pecker about the parameters of this agreement with Ms. McDougal?
Yes.
Did Mr. Pecker tell you that he felt that the agreement was bulletproof?
Yes.
And what did you understand that to mean?
That they got it. That this is locked down. We prevented the story from being released on ABC News, and effectively the story has now been caught.
And did you update Mr. Trump on that conversation?
Yes, ma'am.
And did you tell him that you had been told by David that the agreement was bulletproof?
Yes.
What was Mr. Trump's reaction to hearing that an agreement had been signed and done and that it was bulletproof?
Fantastic. Great job.
Now, did at some point Keith Davidson, the attorney for Karen McDougal, reach out to you after the agreement had been finalized with AMI?
Yes.
Were you familiar at that time with who Keith Davidson was?
Yes.
And how did you know him at that time?
I had worked with Keith Davidson back in 2011 when there was a story that was out that dealt with Stormy Daniels. And in that story, it was on a website called thedirty.com that Stormy actually wanted it taken down, and we had worked together to effectuate that.
To take the story down from the dirty?
Yes.
Now, let me have you take a look, please, at People's Exhibit 62 in evidence. By the way, your communications with Keith Davidson were also by phone, also by text?
Yes, it was phone, email, text.
Did you also sometimes communicate with him on an encrypted application?
Yes, ma'am.
Taking a look at People's 62, do you recognize that email?
I do.
And what was this email about?
It's on August 5th, 2016, email sent by Keith Davidson to me, and it states, Michael, please call me at your convenience. Thanks.
And was this after AMI had signed the deal with Karen McDougal?
Yes,
And did you end up having a call with Keith Davidson about the matter?
I did.
Could you describe just generally the substance of the call? You can take that down. Thank you. Actually, do you know what? Let me just ask you. When you received this email, did you then call Keith Davidson
I did.
as per his request?
Yes.
All right. So tell us, if you would just briefly, what the conversation was with Keith Davidson.
Great job. The boss, obviously very happy about it. The matter is now resolved.
Did Keith tell you that he had resolved the matter?
Yes.
And that was you telling him that the boss would be very pleased and thank you and good job?
Yes.
What's your understanding of why Keith Davidson reached out to you after this deal was concluded?
Objection.
Sustained.
Now, after AMI finalized the deal with Karen McDougal and paid the $150,000 for the life rights and also for the other that she was going to be doing, did you have any conversations with Mr. Pecker about Mr. Trump reimbursing AMI for the money that AMI put out?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
So David had asked me when he should anticipate receiving or being paid back the $150,000. He needed to get the $150,000. That he wanted the $150,000 back because it was too much money for him to hide from the CEO of the parent company. And he had also just laid out $30,000 previously. So he was putting pressure on me to speak to Mr. Trump and to get the money back.
Did you have several conversations with Mr. Pecker where he urged you to try to move it along and get him repaid?
Yes. I don't know if I would characterize it as urge as much as he insisted.
Was he upset about it?
Very.
So, directing your attention now to about September of 2016, did you have lunch with Mr. Pecker where he pressed you further on that matter?
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that matter?
So he asked me if I would meet him at his favorite Italian restaurant, and I went to meet him. And again, he expressed his anger that I need to get this money back. And I said, look, Mr. Trump told you that he would pay you back. So I'll pay you back.
Did you, after the lunch meeting with Mr. Pecker where he was, as you say, upset about not being repaid, Did you talk to Mr. Trump about that? Did you inform him of that?
I did.
And what did Mr. Trump say in substance about David Pecker's concerns about getting it paid?
Don't worry, I'll take care of it.
And did you discuss with Mr. Trump David Pecker's request for that money back on one occasion or more than one occasion?
Several occasions.
Around the same time, did you have any conversations with Mr. Trump regarding other stories that AMI may have had in the past and some concerns about that?
Yes.
Can you tell the jury a little bit about that?
So David had expressed to me that obviously the relationship with Mr. Trump goes back many, many years. And there was a file drawer or a locked drawer, as he described it, where files that related to Mr. Trump existed. And at that point in time, David was being considered for the position of CEO at Time Inc., Time Magazine. And one of the concerns that I had that I expressed to Mr. Trump was if he goes, there is a series of papers there that relate to you.
And what was your concern specifically with respect to those stories and Mr. Pecker leaving AMI?
Well, I didn't know what those stories were, and nobody was discussing that with me, but that they would be open for use.
Meaning that other people might get their hands on them?
Yes, because we didn't know who the potential CEO or replacement would be.
And was Mr. Trump concerned about that at that point as well?
Yes,
Did you discuss with Mr. Pecker those concerns about whatever other stories AMI might have in that locked drawer?
yes.
And what did Mr. Pecker say?
He could technically buy them. We will figure out a way for you to take control over them.
And around the same time, were you having some discussions with David Pecker about purchasing from AMI those life rights to Karen McDougal's story?
Yes, that was all part of the same transaction.
So let me direct your attention now to September 6th of 2016. Did you record a conversation that you had with Mr. Trump about purchasing from AMI the life rights to Karen McDougal's story and these other stories that AMI might have?
Yes,
Now, during the time, the 10 years that you worked for Mr. Trump, how many conversations with him did you tape?
none other.
So this was the only one?
Yes, ma'am.
Why did you feel it was important to tape this one conversation?
It was so I could show it to David Pecker, and that way he would hear the conversation so that he would know that we are going to be paying him. Mr. Trump is going to be paying him back because it became a regular conversation between the two of us.
That he needed to be paid back?
And I also wanted him to remain loyal to Mr. Trump.
So, how did you go about recording this conversation with Mr. Trump?
I had my cell phone in my hand and I put it on voice memo. All Apple iPhones have it. And I hit record and I walked in
Walked in where?
to Mr. Trump's office.
And where did you put your phone when you recorded this conversation with Mr. Trump?
It was in my hand.
Did you sit down to talk to him? Were you standing when you had this conversation with him, or were you seated, if you can recall?
I don't recall.
About how far away were you from Mr. Trump when you made this recording using your phone?
On the opposite side of the desk.
To your knowledge, was Mr. Trump aware that you were recording this conversation?
No, ma'am.
Can you hand this to the witness, please? Thank you. I'm handing you a thumb drive that, among other exhibits, contains People's 246, which is a recording, and People's 248, a transcript.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Have you previously reviewed that recording, People's 246, and the transcript, People's 248, on that thumb drive?
Yes, ma'am.
How do you know that you reviewed those two exhibits previously?
Because it has my initials on it.
And you say it has, would it be the thumb drive?
I'm sorry, the thumb drive has my initials on it.
Okay. And does it also have the date or just your initials?
It does.
You don't have to pull out the date, but it has the date and your initials. Now, People's 246, the recording of that conversation that you taped Mr. Trump on September 6th, 2016, is that an exact copy of the original audio recording that you made on your phone?
Yes.
And whose voices are on that audio recording?
Several people.
Who are they?
Mr. Trump, mine, Rona Graff.
When you say Rona Graff, was she in and out?
Rona Graff came in and out, but you certainly hear her voice. She's executive assistant again to Mr. Trump.
Now, what generally, before we listen to it, is discussed that's on that taped audio recording?
That I had been working with Alan Weisselberg in terms of,
Well, let me stop you a second.
I'm sorry.
Just in terms of generalities, when you first walked in, was Mr. Trump on the phone?
Yes.
Does the audio recording capture some of his conversation on the phone?
Yes.
And did you discuss partly the purchase of materials from AMI?
Yes.
Did you also discuss another matter with him before you got to that?
Yes.
What generally was that?
Charleston. I was referring to a piece of property in Charleston.
Okay. Was it also generally a discussion of some divorce papers
Yeah.
that you had with Mr. Trump at the time?
Yes. That's another topic that came up.
Is that audio recording, People's 246, a true and accurate representation of the conversation you had with Mr. Trump on that day, on September 6th of 2016?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I mentioned a transcript, People's 248, that you also reviewed on that thumb drive. Did you compare that closely with the recording of the conversation?
I did.
Now, is that transcript just a portion of what's on the recording?
Yes.
And does it reflect the portion of the recording related to the purchase of those materials from AMI?
Yes, ma'am.
And is that transcript a true and accurate representation of that portion of the conversation regarding the purchase of materials from AMI?
Yes. There was one change that was made to one word.
Okay. And what is currently the transcript that you reviewed
Yes.
carefully against the tape? Is it true and accurate in terms of the words that are spoken by both yourself and Mr. Trump?
Yes, ma'am.
I would like to now play, please, one time through for the jury, People's 246. And if we could play it once in its entirety, thank you. Now, Mr. Cohen, let me ask you, the first 2 minutes or so of the conversation were not related to the Karen McDougal matter, is that right?
That's correct.
That's when Mr. Trump was on the phone and when you were talking to him about some other divorce papers and Charleston, is that right?
Yes, as well as Pastor Mark Burns.
So I'm now going to ask for us to listen to just some portions. We're going to stop and start it. I'm going to ask you a few questions. So if we could play now the recording from minute 2 and 4 seconds to 2 and 15 seconds, and then I will ask you a few questions. First of all, who is our friend David?
It's referring to David Pecker.
And what did you mean by I need to open a company regarding the transfer of all that information? What were you talking about?
Well, to open up an LLC, and the LLC would be the beneficial owner of all the information that was contained in that drawer that David was referencing,
And all that information, including also the Karen McDougal matter?
as well as the Karen McDougal matter.
What was the reason for talking about opening up a company?
In order to have separation, keeping it away from Mr. Trump,
Now, why was it important to keep it away from Mr. Trump, the purchase of that information?
for privacy purposes and for the benefit of Mr. Trump.
Now, you didn't refer to Mr. Pecker by his full name. You just said David. Why didn't you use his full name? And was this sort of typical for this conversation?
It wasn't necessary. Mr. Trump knew who I was referring to. It was an ongoing conversation that we had been having.
Can we play now the recording from 2 minutes and 15 seconds to 2 minutes and 21 seconds? Thank you. You mentioned within your conversation with Mr. Trump, Alan Weisselberg.
Yes.
Who was he at that time?
Alan Weisselberg was the chief financial officer of the Trump organization.
And why did you tell Mr. Trump that you were setting up the LLC and discussing it with Alan Weisselberg?
Because Mr. Trump had previously directed me to speak with Alan Weisselberg about getting this matter handled.
And why were you letting Mr. Trump know that you had been in discussion with Mr. Weisselberg about this?
Because we are going to need money, and we are going to need to open up the LLC to resolve this issue.
And Mr. Weisselberg's role at the time you said was?
Chief financial officer. He handled all of the finances. It was every penny that came in or out went through Alan's office.
And so this was partly why Mr. Trump directed you to work with him, and this was not unusual for you to work with Mr. Weisselberg on financial matters regarding Mr. Trump. Is that right?
Correct.
Now, what did you understand Mr. Trump to mean when he said, "What do we have to pay for this? What do we got to pay for this?"
We were referring to the $150,000 that was advanced by AMI in order to purchase the life rights of Karen McDougal.
So when Mr. Trump said, "What do we got to pay for this 150?" What was your understanding about the state of Mr. Trump's knowledge at that point about how much money it was going to take to purchase this?
Mr. Blanche, your objection is overruled.
He already knew based upon conversations with David, which is why he mentioned the number 150.
Now, can we play the rest of the tape, though? Can we play the rest of the tape through, please, just to the end? Thank you. Now, what was the significance of all that stuff that was mentioned?
All that stuff is referencing the information that David Pecker had accumulated over the years of Mr. Trump that was in the alleged locked door or drawer,
And including also the Karen McDougal story.
and including Karen McDougal.
Now, what was the conversation about someone maybe getting hit by a truck? What was that about it?
As I said before, Alan Weisselberg was being considered, I'm sorry, David Pecker was being considered for the CEO position of Time Inc. And the concern was the information. So all the stuff refers to that.
Now, you mentioned the word financing, and Mr. Trump asked you about that. Can you explain that?
That was not the best usage of a word. What I really meant was funding, not financing.
And what did you mean by what you had, what needed to be funded?
How much money needed to be paid?
Paid to who?
Paid to David Pecker, AMI.
Okay, and is that what you understood by "we will have to pay him something"?
Yes.
By "we have to pay him something"?
Yes.
What did you understand Mr. Trump to mean by saying "pay with cash"?
Well, to pay in green, which would obviously be one way to avoid any type of paper transaction. But that's not what I thought was the best way to do it.
And so is that why you said no?
Correct.
Did you want to take a break, Your Honor?
It's up to you. Is this a good time?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Jurors, let's go ahead and take our morning recess. I will see you in about 15 minutes. You may step out.
All rise.
You may be seated, sir. You can step out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All rise.
A reminder, you are listening to a verbatim reading of the state of New York against Donald J. Trump. This is from part 59, the morning session on May 9th, 2024. You can find more at everylegalword.com. We resume this reading where we left off. Mr. Blanche, in the past, my practice has always been there when there's a tape or something like that produced into evidence. I normally give some sort of limiting instruction along the lines of, jurors, I just want you to know that the transcript is not in evidence. The transcript is just an aid to assist you, and it is the tape that is evidence. No one has requested that instruction. Do you want to leave it like that, or would you want me to give it?
We would.
I believe the transcript is in evidence.
It is in evidence as an aid, and I'm going to give that instruction.
If Your Honor can give it, if Your Honor can give it even right now, since we finished that part of the testimony, that would make sense.
Sure. Let's bring the witness back, please.
Witness entering.
You are still under oath, Mr. Cohen.
Yes, sir.
Let's get the jury, please.
All rise. Jury entering.
You may be seated.
Case on trial continued. All jurors are present and properly seated.
Jurors, just one quick instruction before we continue with the testimony. You heard the tape played, and you also have seen a transcript. I just want to remind you that the evidence in this case is the tape itself. The transcript has been offered to you merely as an aid to assist you in understanding what is in evidence and that is the tape. The transcript is also in evidence, but again, it is the tape itself that is the evidence.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Cohen, when we ended off before the break, I was asking you about Mr. Trump saying something about paying in cash. Why did you think it was a bad idea for Mr. Trump's suggestion that this be paid in cash?
Because we needed to acquire the information, the documents, and I believe that the proper way to do it would be by check and make it appear to be a proper transaction.
Now, at the end of the tape, it cuts off, and there's a voice that's heard at the end of the tape before it cuts off. Whose voice is that?
It's my voice.
And what do you recall about why that recording cut off that way with your voice?
Because I received an incoming phone call.
And what do you understand you were saying in that last piece when you hear your voice?
Hello, are you there?
Now, why did you, when you tried to take that call, you said the incoming call you thought was coming in. Did the recording of your conversation with Mr. Trump end at that point?
Yes.
And why did you try to take that call instead of continuing to tape the conversation with Mr. Trump?
I must have believed it was an important call.
Was there another reason also that you were comfortable ending the tape?
Yes.
Tell us about that, please.
I didn't want to record more. I already had enough that I would have been able to show David Pecker so as to convince him that he was going to receive his $150,000 back.
Now, let's put up, please, for Mr. Cohen, what's in evidence, a page from People's Exhibit 400, the page that's Bates ending 2726, please. Now, Mr. Cohen, have you had a chance to review this record, this AT&T record regarding your call history?
Yes.
And do you recognize it to be an AT&T record of calls to or from your cell phone ending in 0114?
Yes.
Does it appear to show an incoming call at around the time that your recording of Mr. Trump cuts off?
Yes.
And does that record indicate a call at around that time that looks like it came in and perhaps went to voicemail?
It says so, yes.
And do you recall when you tried to pick up that call, do you recall whether it connected or went to voicemail?
I don't recall.
You can take that down, please. Can we take a look now at a page of what's in evidence as People's Exhibit 263, a page with a Bates ending 69559? Does that appear to be a contact from your phone records, from your phone contacts?
It is.
Have you had a chance to review that against those AT&T records?
I have.
And does that indicate the number or the person who is attached to the number of that incoming call at around the time that the recording cut off?
It does.
And who does that number come back to, according to your contacts?
It comes back to Kathy Battle, who is the branch manager over at Capital One Bank.
So it is your understanding that that was the call that came in,
Yes.
based on the review of these records?
Yes.
You can take that down. Thank you. Now, after the audio ended, you ended the audio recording by trying to pick up this call. Did you continue some conversation with Mr. Trump?
Yes.
And what was the gist of the conversation that you continued with Mr. Trump after the recording ended?
I'm going to head over to Alan Weisselberg's office and I will get back to him with more of an update.
So was there a really substantial conversation after the end of that taped recording?
Yes.
And when you say yes, was it a substantially long conversation?
No, it was not substantial.
And at that point, as you withdrawn, you mentioned that the point of this recording was so that you could convince Mr. Pecker that Mr. Trump had agreed to repay the money.
To appease him that he was going to receive the money back.
Was there any reason to have any real further conversation with Mr. Trump about this at that time?
No.
Now, I'm going to ask you to please put up People's 247 also in evidence. Now, Mr. Cohen, this is metadata from your phone regarding the audio tape of your conversation with Mr. Trump on September 6th of 2016. I want to ask you a question. After you made that audio recording using your phone, did you ever alter that recording?
No.
And is that recording exactly the same as the day that you made it on September 6th of 2016?
Yes.
You can take that down. Thank you. Now, I want to go back to your conversation with Mr. Trump on that audio recording where you mentioned having spoken with Alan Weisselberg about setting this whole thing up. Do you remember that?
I do.
I just want to go back to you. Was it typical for you to discuss financial matters with Alan Weisselberg?
It was typical, too, for everybody to discuss financial matters with Alan Weisselberg.
And that was why?
Because he was the chief financial officer of the company and was a long-serving, loyal employee to Mr. Trump.
And so was Mr. Weisselberg, to your knowledge, in charge of the finance and accounting functions at the Trump organization?
Yes. One additional thing.
Yes, sir.
It was also because Mr. Trump would direct me to go to speak to Mr. Weiselberg.
Was that unusual either?
No,
To direct you to speak to Mr. Weisselberg about financial transactions?
no.
Did, to your understanding, did Mr. Weisselberg report directly to Mr. Trump at the Trump organization?
Yes.
And I think you said Mr. Weisselberg was a long-standing executive employee there for many years.
Yes, ma'am.
Where was Mr. Weisselberg's office located in relation to Mr. Trump's office?
Also on the 26th floor towards the back.
Whose office was closer to Mr. Trump's, yours or Mr. Weisselberg's?
Well, initially, it would have been pretty similar, but the second office that I moved into, I was.
What was your relationship like with Mr. Weisselberg at the time?
It was very good.
And did you observe how frequently Mr. Weisselberg interacted with Mr. Trump?
Yes.
And what did you observe?
It was a regular basis.
And from your experience working at the Trump organization, would a deal of this magnitude, a $150,000 deal, have been done at the Trump organization without Alan Weisselberg?
Objection.
Overruled.
No, not. It wasn't even a deal of this magnitude. It was any deal would end up going through Alan. Alan handled all the finances coming in and out.
Can you describe generally the conversation you had with Mr. Weisselberg about the McDougal transaction?
So I went to Alan's office. I expressed to him that we needed funding of $150,000 to consummate this transaction. Alan then said to me, well, if we do it from a Trump entity, that kind of defeats the purpose because the point is not to have the Trump name affiliated to this at all. It's really to create a barrier. And so he asked me to think about ways that we could raise the $150,000.
Before we get back to that for a moment, in terms of opening up a separate LLC to handle it, did you have a conversation with Mr. Alan Weisselberg about that?
Objection.
You can answer.
No, I just told him I was going to open an LLC.
Was there discussion about doing that to make it more difficult to track directly to either Mr. Trump or the Trump organization?
It was in order to keep it separate.
And approximately how many conversations do you think you had with Mr. Weisselberg about the McDougal transaction?
Maybe 10, 12.
Now, did there come a time that you had some conversations and began working with someone named Daniel Rothstein associated with AMI in terms of effectuating this transfer of the rights from AMI to an LLC?
Yes.
And who was Daniel Rothstein to your knowledge?
He is an employee over at AMI.
And by the way, you had Mr. Rothstein's contact in your phone as well?
Yes,
And did you communicate with him by phone?
I did.
And by email?
Yes,
Did you also, on some occasions, communicate with him by encrypted applications?
I believe so.
And why did you do that with him?
In order to keep the matter secret.
So let's show now, please, just to the witness, the court and counsel, People's Exhibit 209 for identification. Do you recognize that document on your screen, sir?
I do.
Do you recognize it to be?
This is a communication from Daniel Rothstein to me by encrypted app signal.
Are those a variety of communications over a number of days with Mr. Rothstein
Yes,
by encrypted app signal?
yes,
Is this an exact copy of those communications between yourself and Mr. Rothstein using that encrypted app on the dates that are reflected in this record?
yes, ma'am.
I offer People's Exhibit 209 in evidence.
No objection.
Accepted into evidence.
Thank you. Let me direct your attention to to September 7th of 2016. There's a text at 8:34 a.m. Thank you for blowing that up for the jury to see and for Mr. Cohen to see. Can you read what's in that communication and explain what it is?
This is just a communication from Daniel Rothstein to me stating, please find possible names. And he listed 5 different possible corporation names that he was going to use to or as the recipient of the assignment agreement.
And what is the date of that first communication that Mr. Rothstein had with you? What date was that?
September 7th of 2016.
And was that just one day after you had taped the conversation with Mr. Trump about setting up an LLC to purchase the information from AMI?
Yes, ma'am.
So you started working with Mr. Rothstein promptly the next day on that matter?
Yes.
Just to clarify something, People's 209 are screenshots or photos of the communications you had with Mr. Rothstein.
It was a screenshot sent to me. Yes.
Now, you mentioned an assignment agreement. Was it was the what is the assignment agreement that he was referencing there?
What he was referencing was to assign the life rights of Karen McDougal to the LLC entity that was being created.
So it would be an assignment from AMI to the company that you set up?
Yes.
Now, if we can scroll down just a little bit, do you see some additional calls in September following that communication?
Yes.
And then I will just ask you to read the communication on September 30th. And if we can blow that up.
September 30th of 2016, approximately, well, 1:36 p.m. I will be at your office in a few minutes.
And do you know what that communication was about?
Yes.
What was it?
It was about the assignment agreement.
Was there a plan to sign it on that day?
Yes, ma'am.
We can take that down. Thank you. I want to now show to the witness counsel and the court only, People's Exhibit 210 for identification. Do you recognize that document?
I do.
What do you recognize it to be?
It is an email from Daniel Rothstein to me on September 23rd of 2016.
Can we scroll down to the next page of that exhibit? What is attached to that exhibit? Do you recognize it?
I do.
Is it a form assignment of license agreement?
It's a non-filled in assignment of license agreement.
And other than the redactions that are in the email in terms of redacting email addresses, is this an exact copy of an email from Mr. Rothstein to you on September 23rd of 2016, attaching that non-filled in-form assignment of licensing agreement?
Yes, ma'am.
I offer People's Exhibit 210 in evidence.
No objection.
210 is accepted into evidence.
Can we display that for the jury now, please? Can we look at that second page? Is that an assignment template agreement that Mr. Rothstein had mentioned in his messages with you earlier on the screenshot exhibit, the screenshot messages?
It is.
Now, did you go ahead, you can take that down. Did you go ahead and form the LLC, the company that was going to handle the payment to AMI for the life rights to Karen McDougal's story?
Yes.
And at the time, what was the name of the company that you formed to handle that transfer of rights?
Resolution Consultants LLC.
And can we put up now, just for the witness counsel and the court, please, People's Exhibit 215 for identification. Do you recognize this document?
I do.
What do you recognize it to be?
It is an email from Patty, who is an employee over at Delaney Corporate, an entity that incorporates for you. To me, with the attachment Resolution Consultants LLC, and it states this is what I would submit for filing.
And does she attach a certificate of formation for Resolution Consultants to be filed?
Yes.
Other than some of the redactions to the email, is this an exact copy of the email with the attached certificate of formation for Resolution Consultants that you received from Patty at Delaney Corp on that day?
It is.
I offer in evidence People's Exhibit 215.
I have no objection.
Accepted into evidence.
Thank you, Your Honor. You can show that to the jury now. What is the date of formation of Resolution Consultants LLC?
September 30th of 2016.
What was your purpose on September 30th, 2016 of forming Resolution Consultants?
To use this entity for the assignment of the McDougal matter, as well as the other information.
You can take that down now. Can we now put up People's Exhibit 162, which is in evidence? Do you recognize that document, sir?
I do.
And what is that?
This is an executed assignment of licensing agreement between AMI as the signer to Resolution Consultants LLC dated September 30th, 2016, and executed by David Pecker and myself.
And that's your signature there?
It is.
And do you recognize David Pecker's signature?
Yes.
Can you just describe for the jury generally what were the terms of this assignment agreement?
As it states in the document, for good and valuable consideration, the signer does hereby sign and transfer to the assignee successors and assigns all of his rights, benefits and obligations to the license agreement.
Just in general, without reading it for the jury, there is a lot of legal language in there. Does it represent the transfer of those rights from AMI to Resolution Consultants?
Yes, the transfer of the McDougal life rights as well as other documents.
Now, why does this agreement reference $125,000 instead of $150,000, which was the payment to Karen McDougal?
So David had expressed to me that we are going to reduce it from 150 to 125 on the basis that 125 was going to represent the life rights because they were engaged with Karen McDougal for 2 covers as well as 24 penned articles. That the compensation to her for that was going to be $25,000. That's what they would have on their books claiming their contract with her was for.
Now, at this time, when you worked out this assignment agreement with AMI between AMI and Resolution Consultants, had you and Alan Weisselberg yet worked out the logistics of where that $125,000 was going to come from?
No,
And who did you understand was ultimately going to pay the $125,000 for the life rights to that material?
Mr. Trump.
Were you planning on owning the life rights to that story?
No, ma'am.
Why not?
I had no reason to own, no need to own the life rights. What was I doing? I was doing at the direction and for the benefit of Mr. Trump.
Now, in signing that agreement, around the time that you signed that agreement with AMI, did you have a conversation with Mr. Trump about doing so?
Yes.
Can we put up, please, you can take that down and put up People's Exhibit 349 and reference the call between Mr. Trump and Mr. Cohen on September 29th of 2016. Do you see a call there, sir, for about 7 minutes and 14 seconds?
Yes.
And what did you discuss? What do you think you discussed on the phone with Mr. Trump during that call?
The Karen McDougal matter.
And did you discuss with him specifically whether you're going to be signing this agreement and finalizing the assignment rights?
Yes. I gave him a complete and total update on everything that transpired that day before.
Why did you speak to him the day before you signed that agreement?
Because it was when I was speaking with David Pecker regarding the transfer and the assignment.
Did you want to let him know that you were getting it done?
Yes.
Objection.
Sustained.
Why did you speak to him the day before you signed it?
In order to let him know that it was being taken care of, that the matter was going to be resolved, and that this conversation, obviously, to let him know that it was being resolved.
You can take that down now. Can you please put up People's Exhibit 161 in evidence? Do you recognize this document, Mr. Cohen?
I do.
What is it?
This is a document. It is, as stated, an invoice from Advisory Services, Inc., with an invoice number of 2016-203, dated September 21st of 2016.
Did you receive this document at some point?
Yes, I did.
Who did you receive it from?
I believe Daniel Rothstein.
What did you understand was the purpose of this document?
The purpose was to reflect $125,000 that was for the assignment.
Was it an invoice for the payment of that 125?
Yes, ma'am.
And let me direct your attention to the description of services. It says flat fee for advisory services for $125,000. Do you see that?
I do.
Was that description a truthful description about this transaction?
No, ma'am.
In truth, what was the $125,000 payment supposed to be for?
For the life rights of Karen McDougal.
And what's your understanding about why you got an invoice, or why this invoice was from a company called Investment Advisory Services instead of AMI directly?
I never knew who they were. I still, to this day, don't. It was clearly just to create separation in order to mask the transaction.
You can take that down. Thank you. Now, ultimately, you signed this assignment agreement and you received this invoice. Ultimately, though, did the company, Resolution Consultants, end up purchasing the Karen McDougal materials and the other materials from AMI?
No.
What happened?
Well, David Pecker contacted me and stated that it was no longer necessary to have Mr. Trump pay the $125,000. I asked him why. Satisfied because now I would report to Mr. Trump that he wouldn't have to pay that amount of money, which would make him happy. And the reason was because that Karen McDougal's front cover on Men's Health magazine had sold more copies than they had had not only anticipated, I think that they had ever, the way David expressed it to me, that they had ever sold, and they had made a lot of money on that, and that it was no longer necessary because it didn't need to. They didn't need to bury the $125,000. He also then had a second cover to use McDougal on, as well as the 24 additional articles that was going to be penned with her name on it. So he felt that it was, even for the 150, it was an excellent business deal.
Did he tell you what to do with the assignment of rights agreement that you had signed?
He did.
What did he tell you to do?
He told me to rip it up, forget it.
Did you update Mr. Trump after that phone call about what David Pecker had told you about ripping up the agreement?
Yes,
And what was Mr. Trump's reaction?
it was great.
Why did you understand it was great?
He doesn't have to pay 125 or $150,000.
Did you have some understanding of what might happen to the other materials that you discussed with David Pecker in terms of the locked drawer and the other materials that were out there?
Yes.
What was your conversation or understanding about what would happen with those?
David was not being considered for Time magazine, so he was going to stay at AMI and that there was no need to do any transfer. Plus, he also didn't believe that any of the documents that existed in that locked drawer were detrimental to Mr. Trump.
Now, in total, approximately, how many conversations would you estimate you had with Mr. Trump about the purchase of Karen McDougal's account and story?
Quite a few.
And were those conversations on the phone, in person, or both?
Both.
And in total, approximately, how many conversations do you think you had with AMI, with David Pecker and Dylan Howard about the Karen McDougal deal?
Also a substantial amount.
By the way, did you ever play for Mr. Pecker the recorded conversation that you had with Mr. Trump where he said he understood that he would have to pay the $150,000?
No,
Why not?
he didn't ask me to. I had told him that I had spoken to Mr. Trump and that he was going to do it. I told him I could, but I just never played it.
In other words, withdrawn. After the conversation you had with Mr. Trump that you taped on September 6th of 2016, did you move promptly ahead the next day with Daniel Rothstein to finalize the agreements then?
Yes.
Was there any need to play that recording for Mr. Pecker?
No.
I would like to direct your attention now to October 7th of 2016. Do you remember where you were on that day?
Yes.
Where were you?
I was in London.
How do you remember that you were in London?
Well, I went to London for my daughter's 21st birthday as well as for my anniversary.
And while you were in London, did you become aware of the release of what's known as the Access Hollywood tape?
Yes.
And how did you become aware of that tape coming out or that it had come out?
I received a phone call.
Who did you receive a phone call from?
Hope Hicks.
Who was Hope Hicks at the time?
Hope Hicks was communication director for the Trump campaign.
Do you also recall receiving at around that time an email from Steve Bannon about the potential release of the Access Hollywood tape?
Yes.
And who was Steve Bannon at the time?
Campaign manager for the Trump campaign.
Did you have Mr. Bannon's email and contact information in your phone?
Yes, ma'am.
Can we take a look now, please, just for the witness counsels and the court, People's Exhibit 218? Do you recognize this email?
I do.
And who is this an email between? Between you and someone else?
This is an email between me and Steve Bannon, as well as Hope Hicks, Jason Miller, Kellyanne Conway, and Dave Bossy.
Was this an email that was forwarded to you from Steve Bannon?
Yes,
Does it relate to the release of the Access Hollywood tape?
it does.
And is it a true and accurate copy of the email and the forwarding of the information from Steve Bannon to you?
Yes, ma'am.
I offer in evidence now the rest of People's 218. Part of it was previously in evidence, now the entire exhibit.
Just the same objection as before.
Noted. Accepted into evidence.
You can put that up on the screen. Can we start at the bottom of the email, which would be the earliest email? And can you tell the jury what you understand this bottom email to be?
Yes, this is an email from David Fahrenhold of the Washington Post dated Friday, October 7th, 2016 at 1:29 p.m. And it's to Hope Hicks with the subject matter of urgent Washington Post query.
And just in general, what is he communicating to Hope Hicks and what is he asking her for?
He is asking for a comment in regard to the leak of the tape from Access Hollywood.
And is there a transcript of the Access Hollywood tape attached to the email from David Farenthold to Hope Hicks?
There is.
And is David Farenthold in that email asking for some comments from Hope Hicks?
Yes, ma'am.
And does Hope Hicks then forward that email to some other folks?
She does.
And who does she forward it to?
She sends it to Jason Miller, David Bossy, Kellyanne Conway, and Steve Bannon.
What were those people's roles at the time?
All of them had roles at the Trump campaign.
And then following, what does Hope Hicks say in that email that she forwards on to those folks involved in the campaign?
Need to hear the tape to be sure, then followed by deny, deny, deny.
And does that get forwarded now as we scroll down? Does that now get forwarded by Mr. Bannon onto you?
Yes, ma'am.
And can you read, or if you can blow that up, thank you, Mr. Cohen's email to Steve Bannon saying, please call me?
Call me.
And why did you ask Mr. Bannon to call you?
Because I wanted to ensure that things were being properly taken care of in order to protect Mr. Trump.
And can we scroll up to the next email by Mr. Cohen when he asked about damage control? Can you read your email, Mr. Cohen?
Yes, ma'am. Again, it's from me to Steve Bannon, October 7th, urgent, Washington Post query. And my statement to him, my text to him, it's all over the place. Who is doing damage control here?
Why is it that you asked that of Mr. Bannon?
In order to protect Mr. Trump.
Were you concerned about the impact of what this tape may have on Mr. Trump's campaign?
Yes,
Thank you. You can take that down. Now, on October 8th, you were still in London, is that right?
that's correct.
And while you were in London, did you have several calls with Hope Hicks about this matter, the Access Hollywood tape,
I did.
and some other matters as well?
Correct.
Did you have her cell phone information in your contacts as well?
I did.
And you used that to communicate with her?
Yes, ma'am.
At one point, did Mr. Trump join a call with yourself and Hope Hicks?
Yes.
On that day, on October 8th?
Yes.
And did you also have another separate call with Mr. Trump on October 8th of 2016?
Yes.
Let's put up People's Exhibit 349, please, and the two calls between Michael Cohen and Mr. Trump on 10/8/16. Does that accurately reflect the two calls that you had with Mr. Trump on the evening of October 8th of 2016?
It does.
And do you have a separate memory of where you were and what you were doing when you had these phone calls with him?
Yes.
What were you doing?
I was with my family and friends in London.
London. Were you having dinner?
I was.
Did you step out to take these calls?
I did.
And what, if any, discussion do you remember with Mr. Trump about the Access Hollywood tape and the strategy for dealing with it?
He wanted me to reach out to all of my contacts with the media. We needed to put a spin on this. And the spin that he wanted put on it was that this is locker room talk, something that Melania had recommended, or at least he told me that's what Melania had thought it was, and used that in order to get control over the story to minimize its impact on him and the campaign.
And what, if anything, did you do at that point to try to assist the campaign with that effort?
I reached out to members of the media.
And in addition, when you say you reached out to members in the media, did you have conversations with them
I did.
along the lines of the conversations of how to minimize the impact?
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
You mentioned that you reached out to the press. Did members of the press also reach out to you?
Yes,
And did you have conversations with the press about this matter?
I did.
What was your understanding about why the press reached out to you about this?
Well, some of the substance of the recording is quite damaging, and they wanted comment.
And were you somebody that they fairly frequently came to and asked for comment on matters related to Mr. Trump?
Yes.
Can we now please can we take that down and show People's Exhibit 257 in evidence? And can we blow up the communications, the text on October 8th of 2016? First, Mr. Cohen, do you recognize these texts?
I do.
Who are they with?
These are text communications between myself and Chris Cuomo. At the time, he was an anchor journalist with CNN.
And did you have his cell phone number in your contacts?
Yes, ma'am.
And did you use that number to communicate with him by phone or text?
Yes,
And do you recall these texts with Mr. Cuomo at the time?
I do.
Can I direct your attention? I think we have them up actually. The 5 texts on October 8th, 2016. Could you read them, please, for the jury?
Yes, ma'am. On October 8, 2016, I received a text message from Chris Cuomo stating, "You going to defeat him? You going to defend him?" I then responded back, "I am in London," to which I think I also stated, "I have been asked by everyone to do shows starting Tuesday, and Tuesday was when I would be back in New York." I then followed through and said, "Not sure what I will do." And Chris Cuomo's comment back to me will be, "Too late. He is dying right now." And by he meant he was referring to Mr. Trump.
What was your understanding about what that meant that he is dying right now?
That this is a tremendously negative story in regard to the Trump campaign.
And about how long before the election was this at that time?
Approximately a month.
And was this one example of some communications you had at the time with members of the press about the Access Hollywood tape?
Yes, ma'am.
What did you understand as a result of those communications and others about the impact of the Access Hollywood tape on the campaign?
Objection.
Sustained as to form. Please rephrase.
Did you have an understanding at the time, based on all of these communications, about the potential impact of the Access Hollywood tape on Mr. Trump's campaign?
Objection.
Overruled.
Yes.
What was your understanding?
That this was going to be significantly impactful, especially with women voters.
Thank you. You can take that down. Can we now put up People's Exhibit 167 in evidence? Do you recognize this email?
I do.
Can you explain first, tell us who the email is with, who it's between, and what it is about?
So this is an email from Dylan Howard on October 8, 2016 to me with a CC to David Pecker. The subject line is link. It says evening. The only story was this posted in October of 2006 before AMI owned it. And he is referring to the old Radar magazine. The tape was not part of the story that existed online. I suggest it would have been lost during the many site changes over the years. Nevertheless, I have deleted the text story. It no longer exists. And he attaches a hyperlink of that story.
Tell the jury what that's about, if you can flesh that out a little bit.
The title of it was Donald Trump, Playboy Man, and it talks about the audio clip, recorded phone conversation between Trump and gossip Chance Hayden, stating that it provides some glimpse into just how exacting the real estate blowhard standards are regarding women.
So let me ask you a question. Did you learn at some point that there was this article called Donald Trump, Playboy Man on Radar Online?
I did.
Who owned Radar Online?
At the time, I didn't know. At the time I made the communication, it was AMI in control of David Pecker.
And when you found out about this article being up on Radar Online, did you ask David Pecker or Dylan Howard to do something about it?
Yes, ma'am.
What did you ask them to do?
Immediately take it down
Why did you ask them to take it down?
because it was negative to Mr. Trump. It would impact the campaign.
Were you concerned about the release of this information in particular because of the release of the Access Hollywood tape?
Yes,
And so you said Dylan Howard, as referenced here, took the article down. Is that right?
that's correct.
And did you update Mr. Trump to let him know that that article had been taken down?
I did.
Do you believe that you communicated that to him in one of the phone calls you had with him on October 8th of 2016?
Yes.
And why did you tell him?
I told him again, so he would know that the task or the situation has been handled to get credit for it because here I am in London with my family for two important events. My daughter's 21, my anniversary, and I wanted David Pecker to get credit as well.
Thank you. You can take that down. Now, do you recall having several calls in the evening of October 8th with David Pecker and also with Dylan Howard?
Yes.
Did you have a number of calls with them that night?
Yes.
Do you recall what was discussed with each of them in general that night?
The Access Hollywood tape,
And was it discussed also the Playboy Online article?
as well as the Playboy.
Did there also come a time that night where one of them indicated to you that a woman named Stormy Daniels was out looking to sell her story publicly?
Yes. That conversation came up as well.
Did that come up with Dylan Howard?
I believe it was Dylan Howard.
Now, did you know at the time when he advised you about that, about who Stormy Daniels was?
I'm sorry.
That's okay. I'll say it one more time. When Dylan Howard told you on the evening of October 8th of 2016 that Stormy Daniels was out looking, well, her manager was out looking to sell her story, did you know who Stormy Daniels was at that time?
I did.
How did you know who she was?
Because it referenced back to the 2011 scenario that I had dealt with previously with David Pecker on, I am sorry, with Keith Davidson on an in order to have a story removed from the dirty.com.
And so, hearing now after the Access Hollywood tape release that her story might come out again, what, if anything, did you think about the potential impact that might have on the campaign?
Objection.
Overruled.
Catastrophic. That this is horrible for the campaign.
I'll take you back for a minute now to 2011 when you first learned about Miss Daniels' account of her encounter with Mr. Trump. Had you learned at that time in 2011 about what Miss Daniels did for a living?
I did.
What did you hear at that time in 2011 about what she did for work?
That she was an adult film star.
And this came up again, I think you mentioned because it was an article on thedirty.com at the time.
Correct.
And you worked with Keith Davidson to get that article taken down.
Yes, ma'am.
In 2011, when you were engaged in doing that and getting the article taken down, did you have a conversation with Mr. Trump about Stormy Daniels?
Yes.
Can you tell us in general the gist of that conversation?
After I received the information from Dylan Howard, I immediately went to Mr. Trump's office, knocked on the door, said, "Boss, I got to speak to you." And I told him about the conversation, the sum and substance of the conversation that I had just had with Dylan Howard. And I asked him if he knew who she was. He told me that he did. And I stated about the story that existed on the dirty.com, that they had a relationship that occurred during a golf outing going back to like 2000 and 2006. And I told him that one of the things that, we need to do is we need to obviously take care of it. We need to absolutely do it. Take care of it.
A reminder that you're listening to a reading of the transcript in the case of the people of the state of New York against Donald J. Trump, indictment 71543-2023. To ensure the future court transcript readings of this and other cases, we kindly ask you to visit everylegalword.com and support this cause. We now resume the reading where we left off.
Did he also tell you about meeting her?
Objection.
Did Mr. Trump also tell you anything about having met her at the golf tournament back in 2006?
Yes.
What did he tell you?
He told me that he was playing golf with Big Ben Roethlisberger, the football player, and they had met Stormy Daniels and others there. But she liked Mr. Trump, that women preferred Trump even over someone like Big Ben.
And did you ask him at that time in 2011 whether he had had a sexual encounter with Stormy Daniels?
I did.
Did he answer you directly?
No, ma'am.
What did he say? Did he say anything in response to that?
No, ma'am.
Did he mention anything about what she looks like?
He said she was a beautiful woman.
Let me go back to your conversations with Mr. Davidson about taking that article down from thedirty.com. Did you also have some conversations with the General Counsel of Life and Style about what he might do if that article wasn't taken down?
Yes, ma'am.
What was the substance of that conversation?
I would file an immediate lawsuit against him.
Ultimately, when you and Keith Davidson were able to get that article taken down and to make sure, actually, let me withdraw and go back. The general counsel you spoke to at Life and Style, were they involved in putting out another article at around that time separate from thedirty.com?
Yes.
And those conversations were about that separate article, meaning In Touch magazine, and making sure that it didn't come out in that magazine?
Correct.
Thank you. After you succeeded in making sure that the In Touch article didn't come out and Keith Davidson was working to take down the article on thedirty.com, did you update Mr. Trump to let him know that it had been taken care of?
I did, and gave the credit actually in that case to Keith Davidson, who was the one who filed and sent papers to the dirty.com to have it removed.
As a result of your efforts and Keith Davidson's efforts, did that article, either article in 2011, get any traction in 2011? Meaning, was it out there much?
No, ma'am.
So let me now move past 2011. Between that and 2011 and 2016, when you found out from Dylan Howard that Stormy Daniels' story had resurfaced again, in between that time, had you heard anything more about the Stormy Daniels matter?
Nothing.
Now, when you learned on October 8th from Dylan Howard that the Stormy Daniels story had resurfaced, did you also learn from Mr. Howard that there was an attorney who would be representing Stormy Daniels in the matter?
Yes.
What did he tell you?
Keith Davidson, he was going to be representing Stormy Daniels.
And was that the same lawyer who had represented her in 2011 that you worked with?
Yes. We had obviously a positive result.
So let me ask to please put up again 177A, Mr. Cohen's text with Dylan Howard. Can you take a look at the text on October 9th, 2016?
Yes.
Actually, if you're able to on these texts, could you read them to the jury, please?
I'm sorry?
Could you read these to the jury?
Yes.
Are these all dated on October 9th, 2016?
Yes.
If you would read them to the jury.
This is from Dylan Howard to me stating, emailed you. Then he also forwarded a second one stating, Keith will do it. Let's reconvene tomorrow.
Who did you understand Keith to be?
Keith Davidson.
Continue, if you would, please.
Then I responded back to him, thank you. Followed it then by another text communication advising that Resolution Consultants LLC is the name of the entity that I formed a week ago, to which I then responded again, whenever you wake, please call my cell because of the difference in time zone.
Now, why did you tell Mr. Howard that you had formed Resolution Consultants, an entity, just the week before?
So that would be the name of the entity that we would use in order to purchase the life rights to the Stormy Daniels' matter.
Thank you. You can take that down. Did you return to New York from London on approximately October 10th, 2016?
I did.
And did you have some further text communications with Keith Davidson and Dylan Howard on that date?
Yes.
Let's put up 178A, please. And specifically, I believe there are two texts. If we can float up a little so Mr. Cohen can read them. Now, who are these texts between or among?
So from Dylan Howard to me on Monday, October 10th, and it states, Keith Michael, connecting you both in regards to that business opportunity, spoke to the client this AM and they're confirmed to proceed with the opportunity. Thanks, Dylan.
Let me ask you, is that a three-way text or a two-way text? In other words, yourself and Dylan Howard, is there anybody else on that text?
Yes, Keith Davidson.
So is it a text from Dylan Howard to both yourself and Keith Davidson?
Yes.
Okay. Can you also read Dylan Howard's next text communication to both yourself and Keith Davidson?
So Dylan Howard sends to both myself and Keith Davidson over to you two, meaning that the two of us should just speak independent.
What did you understand to be the business opportunity that Mr. Howard was referring to?
The business opportunity was the acquisition of the life rights of Stormy Daniels.
Now you can take that down. Thank you. Can we now show People's Exhibit 337 and highlight the call between Mr. Cohen and Keith Davidson on October 10th of 2016? I believe there are two calls referenced there. Now, after Dylan Howard confirmed that Keith Davidson would be representing Stormy Daniels, did you reach out and speak with Keith Davidson by phone?
I did.
And from this point on, did you speak a great deal with Mr. Davidson about purchasing the life rights to Stormy Daniels' story?
Yes.
You could take that down. Thank you. Now, after you learned from Dylan Howard and from Keith Davidson about the Stormy Daniels story and her wanting to publish that story and the conversations about purchasing that story, did you speak to Mr. Trump?
I did.
Can you tell us, first of all, why did you speak to Mr. Trump about it?
It's because it was a matter that affected him and because that was what I always did, which was to keep him abreast of everything.
Was this also a serious matter at that time?
A very serious matter.
Did you tell him what you had heard from Dylan Howard and Keith Davidson?
Yes.
And what was his reaction?
He was really angry with me. I thought you had this under control. I thought you took care of this. I expressed to Mr. Trump, we did, 2011. I have no control over what she goes out and does. And he expressed to me, there is previous denial. Just take care of it. There was a lot going on at the campaign at the time. He was like, just take care of it.
Did he say anything to you at that time about how this might be viewed if it got out?
Yes.
What did he say in substance?
He said to me, This is a disaster, total disaster. Women are going to hate me because this is really a disaster. Women will hate me. Guys may think it's cool, but this is going to be a disaster for the campaign.
What, if anything, did you understand about withdrawn? Why did you understand? What did you understand him to mean by women will hate this and what his concern was?
Objection.
Overruled.
So at the time, Mr. Trump was polling very, very low with women. And
You said very well.
no, very poorly. I am sorry.
It's all right. I couldn't hear.
He was polling very poorly with women. And this, coupled with the previous Access Hollywood tape, he just stated this is a disaster and get control over it.
Did you have any conversation with him about strategy in dealing with the story?
I'm sorry.
Did you have any conversation, additional conversation with Mr. Trump about a particular strategy about how to get control of it and how to deal with it?
He told me to work with David and get control over this, purchase the life rights. We need to stop this from getting out.
Was there any conversation about pushing it to a period of time?
Yes.
What was that?
So during the negotiation to purchase and acquire the life rights, what he said to me is, what I want you to do is just push it out as long as you can. Just get past the election, because if I win, it has no relevance. I will be president. If I lose, I don't even care.
Did you bring up at the time the topic of his wife, Melania, in one of those conversations with Mr. Trump?
I did.
What did you say in substance to him?
I said to him, and how's things going to go with upstairs?
Were you concerned about that?
Yes, I was.
And what, if anything, did he say to you about that?
Don't worry, he goes. How long do you think I will be on the market for? Not long.
What did you understand that to mean?
He wasn't thinking about Melania. This was all about the campaign.
Now, those conversations that you had with Mr. Trump, were they in person, on the phone, or both?
Both.
Now, can we put up now, please, People 63 in evidence? Can you blow up the body of the email so that Mr. Cohen can read it? Do you recognize this email, Mr. Cohen?
This is from Keith Davidson to me on October 11th,
What year?
2016. And it says, Michael, please find Miss Daniels's settlement agreement and side letter agreement attached. I have not filled in the side letter agreement SLA, which identifies the parties to this agreement. Under the terms of the agreement, neither my client or I are entitled to possession of the SLA. Settlement sum is $130,000. I have also attached my firm's wiring instructions for your reference. Ms. Daniels' expressed dissatisfaction with your schedule of the delay of 10 days for funding. To that end, you will see that I placed this Friday, October 14th of 2016 as the funding deadline. Let me know if this is a problem. Let me know if you have any questions or concerns about anything. Keith.
Let me ask you to blow up the top of the email, which shows the tos and froms. Did you receive this email at your Trump Organization email address?
I did.
Now, this email that you received, which can we scroll down, does that contain an attachment? Does this contain the settlement agreement and the side letter agreement that was referenced?
Yes.
And does this agreement at this point contain the signatures of Ms. Daniels and Mr. Davidson, but no signatures on your side yet?
Correct.
So the date of this email, if we can go back to the email again for a moment, is October 11th. Is that right? Of 2016?
Yes.
Is that just a few days after the release of the Access Hollywood tape?
Yes.
By October 11th of 2016, had you and Keith Davidson already agreed in principle to the terms of this agreement?
Yes.
And you had some discussions about how much would need to be paid to Stormy Daniels for this agreement by that date. Had you arranged a number?
Yes, ma'am.
And tell us just in general the terms of that agreement on this date.
For the sum of $130,000 that Miss Daniels would execute a non-disclosure agreement, that the life rights story would never come out, that she wouldn't speak of it, and
Was there a breach provision, an amount, a liquid amount?
yes. There was a very large $1 million violation, liquid punitive damages. It was a clause that we put in where she would owe at that point in time the LLC that was going to do it. She would owe them $1 million per violation.
Whose idea was it to have that $1 million, as you say, punitive damage provision in the contract?
It was mine,
What was the point of that?
to ensure that she didn't speak. Not only that, there was also a provision in there that she disclose who she had told the story to, and they were included in the agreement.
There was a list of names that were included in the agreement.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, the email mentions a side letter agreement. That is also one of the attachments here. What was the purpose of the side letter agreement that is referenced here?
The side letter agreement would be a one-page document that indicates pseudonym names that were going to be used in the non-disclosure agreement. And the purpose of that is if somehow the non-disclosure agreement got out, having the names of Peggy Peterson or David Dennison would have no meaning to anyone.
And so, would the side letter agreement be a key to who those names are really related to?
Yes. I was the only one that would have that one page.
And explain why you were the only one that was going to hold on to that side letter agreement, which indicated the true names of the people involved in the agreement.
In that way, I was the only one. There is no way for it to be released, and the information would never get out.
Now, you said that I think by this date, neither you, obviously, or Mr. Trump had signed this agreement by that date.
No, ma'am.
Why hadn't you signed it at that point?
Because during my conversations with Mr. Trump, it was again about delaying the deal and trying to push it past the election, which was upcoming.
Now, in the email, Mr. Davidson says that Ms. Daniels had expressed some dissatisfaction with your scheduled delay of 10 days for funding. What was he referring to about your scheduled delay of 10 days for funding?
Well, he wanted an immediate wire transfer, and I expressed to him I would need 10 days in order to fund the transaction. I would have waited to the 10th day and do it again, which is what I was instructed to do, push it past the election date.
So you could have funded it earlier, but you tried to push it off with the additional 10 days. Is that right?
I was following directions.
So at this point, he's asking for a funding deadline of October 14th. Is that correct?
Yes.
And were you intending at that point to make that deadline of October 14th?
No, ma'am.
What were you trying to do?
Delay it.
Your Honor, do you want me to continue?
Is this a good time to break?
It's up to you. It's perfectly fine.
Jurors, I will remind you all of my instructions, including that you not discuss this case either among yourselves or with anyone else. Please continue to keep an open mind as to the defendant's guilt or innocence. Please do not form or express an opinion as to the defendant's guilt or innocence. I will see you at 2 o'clock. Enjoy your lunch. You may be seated, sir. You can step down. Is there anything that we need to go over?
No, Your Honor.
Nope.
Okay, I will see you at 2.
Again, this is a reminder that you're listening to a reading of the transcript of the case of the people of the state of New York versus Donald J. Trump, indictment 71543/2023. In order to ensure future court transcript readings of this and other cases, we kindly ask you to visit everylegalword.com and support this cause. We will continue this recording at another time. Thank you.